Thanks for joining us on Wellness Talk Radio. I'm Chris Costello. If you'd like to hear the interviews online, you can go to wellnesstalkradio.com. And today we are talking with neurologist and New York Times best-selling author, Dr. David Perlmutter. Dr. Perlmutter, great to have you on the program.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
So last time we talked a lot about grain brain. Now you've got another New York Times bestseller, Brainmaker, out.
That's right. And what is really so exciting is that Brainmaker takes us to a new place, but it's a place that validates everything we talked about earlier in Grain Brain. And that is, number one, the importance of nutrition in human health as it relates to the brain. But number two, it relates these recommendations that we made previously about a lower carb, higher fiber diet that welcomes good fat back to the table. It looks at these dietary recommendations through the lens of the microbiome, this 100 trillion organisms that live within the gut that are controlling every conceivable aspect of our metabolism that has a huge role to play in determining the destiny of the human brain. So it's a very, very exciting time, I have to admit.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Dr. Perlmutter, what got you into this pioneering work originally?
It's an interesting question. I think I gravitated towards the neurosciences as a very young person, with a father as a neurosurgeon, spending a lot of time with him, up in the middle of the night when I was 10 and 12 years old, going to the hospital and seeing patients. So he really imparted in me an interest, I think, in the brain. Dedicated myself to studying it, began research when I was 18, published when I was 19 and 20, because it really found it fascinating. But ultimately, after finishing my residency and coming out in the world ready to do all such great things to have an impact with respect to brain disorders, I found a lot of disappointment because, it was basically, in neurology then, diagnose and adios, meaning this is what you've got and there's nothing we can do about it. And to a very significant degree, that mentality is pervasive and persists even today when looking at such challenging disorders as autism and Alzheimer's and ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, and so many others where there's really nothing in the book of pills that is a quick fix for any of these issues. So I have found myself over the past 3 decades really looking at what else is playing a role here, and looked at nutrition, recognizing that it's very influential in human health and powerfully influential in terms of the brain. And now with the understanding of this huge role of the gut bacteria in every aspect of human health, including the brain, we have launched ourselves into an area of profound potential in terms of finally getting some leverage against these devastating conditions, and not only in treating them, but even further in preventing them in the first place. So it's a very, very exciting time.
So it sounds like you started out as kind of a traditional neurologist treating people, and at some point you got frustrated and moved to this model of looking at its role in health.
That's right. And I'd say that, again, it came out of a place of frustration. More recently, it came from really a heart-centered area of wanting to do more for my patients, and some personal experiences as well that have further pushed me to work hard in terms of making a difference. And I think when you really understand that what I'm saying here is that lifestyle choices, especially nutrition, play a role in health and in brain health, after a while that becomes sort of a duh in our lives. You realize, of course, that makes sense, but we sort of get numbed into this place of thinking that, well, we do whatever the heck we want, eat whatever we want, become massively overweight, no problem, there's a pill for that, we can treat your diabetes, we'll treat your Alzheimer's. Not happening. These diseases can be treated, but even before they're treated, they need to be approached from the mentality of prevention. And yes, you could treat diabetes to lower your blood sugar with pills, but it treats the smoke. It ignores the underlying problem. And that problem begins in the gut. That is front and center what we now recognize, the area of concern in terms of obesity and diabetes and inflammation as a process, which is the cornerstone of Alzheimer's, autism, diabetes, coronary artery disease, and even cancer. This all begins in the gut, and that's one of the central pillars of Brainmaker.
And let's talk about, Dr. Perlmutter, why is that so important?
Well, again, because of the role of the gut bacteria in terms of regulating immunity, regulating inflammation, and now that we know we can control the gut bacteria, we know that we therefore can have a major impact on this mechanism, inflammation and immune issues that underlie so many of our most dreaded conditions. It's revolutionary information. And it really began with a dedication of $115 million to the Human Microbiome Project back in 2008, when the first science was started to become known to our researchers about the role of gut bacteria in determining our health destiny. My mission has been to leverage this information with respect to the brain, making this gut-brain connection that now, gee whiz, you see it on the cover of Scientific American, for crying out loud. It's becoming very popular to talk about this.
Thank goodness. And so what can people, how can they figure out what the most important things to do are if they're trying to solve this puzzle for themselves?
Well, there are many, many factors. And I think even before we get to a discussion about what you can do to rehab your gut, it's really the second half of Brainmaker. The first half is, what does the gut bacteria, what is its role? And then, part two, middle of the book, what makes it go bad? How do we get into trouble? We get into trouble by being born by cesarean section, by overusing antibiotics, by eating food that is high in carbohydrates and sugar and devoid of fiber, by eating food or drinking water that has chlorine, and various things that we do that affect the microbiome and then set the stage for problems. When the microbiome is disturbed, we have leakiness of the gut. That paves the way for inflammation. And understand that inflammation as a mechanism is the cornerstone of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, autism. Depression is an inflammatory disorder. Depression comes from the gut. When we begin to get our arms around that and recognize that inflammation has its genesis in the gut and is dependent upon imbalances of gut bacteria, then we begin to look at our choices, like whether we do or don't take antibiotics, whether we eat food that's high in sugar or not, whether we choose to have our children born by vaginal delivery or cesarean section. It matters a whole heck of a lot in terms of forming the microbiome, creating the right array of bacteria in the gut of a newborn child by virtue of passing through the birth canal and picking up those bacteria in the birth canal during a natural birth versus bypassing that whole process by being born by C-section. Now, C-section saved lives of mother and baby. No question, a valuable technique. But I think it's really important for parents to understand that the discussion with reference to that event in terms of forming the microbiome needs to center more on those issues rather than just how big will my scar be. Parents need to understand that children born by C-section have about triple the risk for developing ADHD. Their risk for autism may be as much as doubled. Their risk for type 1 autoimmune diabetes is up 70%. And their risk of becoming overweight as an adult is increased by 50%. So this is really good information for parents to have, because now they're looking at the microbiome, which plays a role in the rest of that individual's life. They're looking at that from the get-go.
Right, and you can prevent these things often.
Well, it's all about choices. And The word doctor doesn't mean healer. It means teacher. And that's what I see my role to be in terms of writing Brainmaker. And that is teaching, giving the information to let people then make what I hope are better decisions. This book is the culmination of 47 pages of peer-reviewed references that I went through to provide this information. This is what current science is telling us about this incredible role of these bacteria living within us. The DNA in your body, 99% of the DNA in your body has nothing to do with mom and dad. 99% of your DNA is contained in the bacteria that live within you. They outnumber your cells 10 to 1. So you're much more bacteria than you are who you think you are. And that's compelling information, but it's also very empowering information because, again, caring for that bacterial colony is what is the key to health moving forward.
And in Brainmaker, it's very comprehensive, but let's give people a little bit of just a few steps they can start taking, Dr. Perlmutter.
Certainly, and I'd say step one would be take a step back and look at the food that you're eating. Food matters perhaps more than any other choice that you make for your total body health and perhaps most importantly for your brain health. So step one is time to take a deep breath and look at the food that you think is good for your body, that you choose to eat. Many people eat food knowing full well it's not the right choice, and I want people to start thinking about their brain future in terms of being affected by the food choices that you make today. So what we emphasize is a diet that's low in carbohydrates, that's primarily vegetable-based but allows certain types of animal products, but that's high in fermented foods like kimchi, kombucha, sauerkraut, fermented vegetables, fermented meats, etc., that are teeming with healthy, good probiotic bacteria. And a diet that's enriched with prebiotic food. Prebiotic fiber is the type of fiber that encourages the growth of the good bacteria that live within all of us. And these are foods that have lots of prebiotic fiber like dandelion greens and Jerusalem artichoke, asparagus, onions, leeks, garlic, jicama, which is Mexican yam. We want to favor those foods that will nurture the right bacteria and steer clear of foods that have lots of carbs, lots of sugar, that favor the overgrowth of bacteria that are bad for the gut, lead to leakiness of the gut, increase inflammation, and pave the way for obesity and diabetes. And, I mentioned diabetes quite a bit because becoming a type 2 diabetic is pretty much a choice. It's a choice based upon the foods that you eat. And when you become a type 2 diabetic, you've doubled your risk for Alzheimer's, a disease for which there is no treatment. Type 2 diabetes is strongly associated with the changes that take place in the gut bacteria. That's why what this book is about is turning back the clock and pushing the reset button on the gut bacteria and paving the way for brain health.
And Dr. Perlmutter, what's the verdict on, you just mentioned, Alzheimer's is not reversible, but when can people start making these changes? I mean, can you reverse some of these conditions?
Well, let me be super clear and indicate that Alzheimer's disease is reversible. Do I need to say it any clearer than that? Alzheimer's disease is reversible. And as a matter of fact, in the journal Aging in September of 2014, Dr. Dale Bredesen from UCLA published for the very first time in history his ability to reverse Alzheimer's or dementia in general in 9 of his first 10 patients. Now, granted, that's not a huge number of patients, but he did so by changing their diets, by changing other aspects of lifestyle, making sure they slept enough, that they got exercise, that they weren't consuming carbohydrates, that they had normal vitamin D levels, that something called homocysteine was normalized. Various things were included in a 36-point program. Not a magic pill. We're years away from that if it ever happens. But a 36-point program finally published in peer-reviewed literature. So I'm going to be super clear in my commentary that Alzheimer's is, in fact, reversible. Now, beyond that, it's preventable. That was published in the journal Lancet Neurology by by Dr. Deborah Barnes of the University of California, San Francisco, 2 years ago, showing that more than 50% of patients with Alzheimer's didn't have to get it if they would have paid attention to these important issues that we're talking about. Alzheimer's is an inflammatory condition, just like coronary artery disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, autism, inflammatory conditions of the brain, like depression is. And inflammation has its genesis in the gut by changes that happen to the gut bacteria. This is what our leading-edge researchers are telling us. And the purpose of Brainmaker is to take that leading-edge science and work with it in such a way that everyone who reads the book can understand it and then put into play those lifestyle changes to pave the way for better brain health.
And Dr. Perlmutter, I'd like to have you tell people where they can find your information and Brainmaker. I know that they're going to want to learn more about this and, this years of research that you've now put into this new New York Times bestselling book.
Brainmaker is available at all the online retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, but also many regular bricks-and-mortar bookstores carry Brainmaker, and so it's available everywhere. My site, where I publish information every day, is drperlmutter.com, oddly enough. And there are videos of our patients who rehabbed their guts and lost weight, became less depressed, autistic child who began speaking and became socially interactive, and a multiple sclerosis patient regaining the ability to walk. So it's some pretty compelling stuff. And clearly it's different than you might expect and that people are used to, and that's good. I'm really happy to say that it is different. It is outside the box.
Just a little tip for people. You talk a lot about probiotics and things like that through food in Brainmaker, but how do people know what probiotics, besides if they want to get them in a supplement form, how do they decide that, what to get?
Certainly, there is a dizzying array of probiotic products that are available, and I outline that. I provide what you should look for in a probiotic in terms of its design, but more importantly, I provide the 5 key probiotic species that I think are really what should be looked for when you're buying a probiotic that has a lot of different species of bacteria in it. So that's really good information to have, and species like Lactobacillus plantarum, Bifidobacterium longum, for example, really key bacteria species that you should look for when you're buying a probiotic. But beyond that, I emphasize consuming probiotic foods. Kimchi is a Korean dish, fermented, become very, very popular these days. I'm all over it, and basically Brainmaker is, and here's why. Providing the information about what these can do for you, how they can rebuild your gut bacteria, and how absolutely fundamental that is for your future health.
Dr. Perlmutter, thank you so much for joining us today on Wellness Talk Radio, and really a heartfelt thank you to you for your books. They've changed my life significantly.
Well, Chris, thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed it and look forward to hearing our interview.